We have introduced the creative cycle, creative threshold, and creative process, and we have detailed the universe's initial stage of becoming, the evolutionary period of emergence. This is Session 5, Relationships, in a course titled Evolution of Consciousness, and that is central to a larger view, Evolution of Consciousness Theory. In this, and the following 2 sessions, we cover a period that began with the threshold of autonomy and unity, circa 15 billion years ago, and that lasted to about 4 billion years ago, the universe's age of structure. It is a time in creation characterized by the emergence of the cosmos, and by the remarkable developments this emergence made possible. At the onset of the evolutionary period of structure, the universe existed as a consciousness made up of autonomous entities of lesser consciousness. By autonomous, we mean that each entity of lesser consciousness possessed a degree of independence from the whole, and from one another. This degree of separateness, within overall consciousness, this degree of self, within the unity of the universe, made possible a new line of evolutionary advance. Motivated by the need to create fulfillment, the creative process lifted the universe to greater awareness and fulfillment, through the formation of relationships between the autonomous entities of consciousness, from which it was composed. To understand the concept of the relationship, we begin with an idea called structure of perception. As you may recall from the previous session, and our look at the universe's prior evolutionary level, the growth of uncertainty, and the weakening strength of perception, that resulted with each doubling of consciousness, created an arrangement of entities within overall consciousness, a scattering of entities in a group, wrapped within a scattering of groups. We can think of this web, or wrap of perception, as a framework, as a structure of perception. Any structure of perception, simple though it may be, implies a level of consciousness, or the awareness through which the components that make up the structure maintain their relationship. Thus, on crossing the threshold of autonomy and unity, the consciousness that was the universe consisted of 2 divisions. One portion was attributable to the entities from which it was composed. Another portion was attributable to the organization of these entities, to the structure of perception through which they were related, and that was made available when uncertainty collapsed. From this it follows that the universe's awareness would be greater than the sum consciousness of its component entities. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It also follows that the awareness experienced by the individual entity would be greater than the level it would experience if alone. To exist as an autonomous entity of consciousness, the component entity would have to be in some way aware of overall consciousness, and of its place in the structure of that consciousness. The component entity would have to be, in some way aware of the universe's need to create fulfillment. Given these observations, the universe could advance to greater consciousness, by increasing the awareness of its component entities, and by increasing the complexity of the structure of perception, through which they were related. It accomplished these objectives by creating relationships. Cycle after cycle, the universe perceived itself as the object of its need to create fulfillment. As it did, the entities of consciousness from which it was composed, perceived one another, as the object of their need to create fulfillment. The entities of consciousness that comprised the consciousness of the whole, created mutually fulfilling relationships, sustained by the power of their need, through local creative cycles. When we look at the relationship, in terms of structure of perception, its origin seems inescapable. If, during the universe's period of multiplication, the universe advanced by unwrapping its previous level of perception, to form conscious entities within itself, it stands to reason that it would next organize these entities. The most remarkable qualities about evolution on this level lie in this organization. From the standpoint of the internal, what can we say about the relationship? In that the relationship generates its own creative cycles and structure of perception, the characteristics we associate with the creative cycle and a structure of perception would exist in the relationship. As with the universe in its entirety, the whole would be greater than the sum of its parts. The relationship would exist as an aspect of consciousness, removed from the entities that constituted its being. The relationship would be an item, a distinct entity, an autonomous aspect of consciousness in itself. Similarly, A component of a relationship would experience a different level of awareness when linked to one or more components than when alone. As such, the nature of the component would vary. When in a relationship with one entity, a component would experience a different level of awareness, and thus be a different entity than it would when in a relationship with 3, 4, or 5 entities. The nature, or the identity of an entity, would be a function of relationship perception. As significant, the greater the number of entities in a relationship, the more dispersed the individual act of perception. This would lead to a weaker bond between entities, and to a less fulfilling relationship. Entities in numerically large relationships, therefore, would be pulled away to form numerically small relationships. This would limit the size, or collective tendency, of the relationship. The idea of the collective may seem trivial, but we will draw on it throughout our depiction of the universe's evolution. The concept becomes particularly relevant in the human realm. The universe advanced as its structure of perception became more complex, and the aspects of consciousness from which it was composed became more autonomous and aware. What, now, would the universe's complexification of consciousness look like, from an external point of view? Each overall creative cycle would mark one click of time and one rebirth of space. Over successive creative cycles, the universe's external evolution would appear as a coming together of regions of uniform energy to form clusters of regions. Moreover, from an external vantage, can we characterize the structure of perception that constituted a relationship as a force exerted over a field? Even at the primitive evolutionary level of the relationship, it would be useful to give the fundamental regions of uniform energy that make up a cluster of time-space regions a name. The concept of matter is arguably premature, but it is appropriate to use a name that will help us introduce the idea in the next session. We will call the universe's elemental regions of uniform energy particles. An internal relationship exists when two or more entities of consciousness perceive one another as the object of their need. Consequently, all the factors we associate with the act of perception, or more generally with the creative cycle, exist on the level of the relationship. Each local act of perception would create one local click of time, and one local rebirth of space, relative time-space. Whereas the idea of relative time-space has been long recognized by physicists, a more novel idea also comes out of our view of the relationship. The greater the number of local acts of perception, per overall act of perception, the faster the pace of time, or more precisely, the faster the pace of what time, as it applies to the universe's overall movement represents evolution. As the number of relationships increased, time accelerated, time acceleration. This does not mean that time, as we typically measure it, changes, say based on radioactive decay. As we will discuss in a future session, in most instances, we can interpret time in the usual way. From the standpoint of the external, our picture of the universe, at the evolutionary stage defined by the relationship, takes on a distinctly chaotic appearance. Over a sequence of spatial rebirths, we see particles unite to form clusters of particles. We see large clusters torn apart to form small clusters. We see the type of a particle change, as the identity of its associated entity of consciousness changes. Clusters of particles would exist in regions of relative time-space, and all regions of local external manifestation would exist within an overall fabric of space and accelerating time. As uncertainty dictates, however, the universe's evolutionary period of the relationship was not without its end. With each creative cycle, more of the universe's experience of emptiness was felt as uncertainty, and less was felt as the motivation needed to drive the next cycle. Then the universe reached the point where it exhausted its potential to create fulfillment, through the simple formation of relationships. Uncertainty overwhelmed and collapsed, to release the full force of the universe's consciousness of emptiness, to be felt as the motivation to create fulfillment. The universe turned in on itself, and grasped itself, as what it had become, an entity poised for the development of more complex internal and external structure, an entity defined by the existence of the relationship. Given the universe's existence, as an entity of consciousness comprised of autonomous entities of lesser consciousness, must not these entities arrange to form relationships? Given the nature of the creative process, must not the relationship embody the qualities of the internal and of the external? With our introduction to the concept of the relationship, we complete Session 5, in our course titled Evolution of Consciousness. We have established the background to set forth into the universe's period of cosmic formation, the becoming, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, termed cosmogenesis. Our course titled Evolution of Consciousness continues in Session 6, Atoms, Molecules, and the Cosmos.